Welcome to the All Things Endurance podcast. I'm your host, Rick Prince, and I'm excited to have on the podcast today Ryan Frankel. Ryan and I go back a while, back to his time when he was working at Goldman as an investment banker, and I was working there in the capacity of a trainer in the fitness center and a manager. That's when I got to know him, and since then he's had an incredible entrepreneurial journey, and he's been very much a mentor to me as well. I don't have a background in business, so some of the things I learned on my own, and the other things I'm heavily relying on other people like Ryan. um, he's also been on Shark Tank, which is pretty amazing, which we'll talk about later in this podcast as well. And I should also mention that Ryan's also a triathlete, so he's one of us crazy endurance athletes. So, welcome to the show, Ryan.
Rick, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. So maybe we can start off by just telling our listeners a little bit more about yourself, maybe your background as an endurance athlete, your sort of entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, on the fitness side of things. So I was a college baseball player. As a little boy, I always thought I was going to grow up and be a professional baseball player. I was taught that, you can do anything you set your mind to, which is true in many regards. But when it came to baseball, there's something about being, 5'9", a buck 50 that the scouts just don't, ooh and ah. So when it came time to graduating, I started my career out as an investor working for Goldman Sachs in New York. And at the time, living in New York, there wasn't a whole lot of baseball opportunities. So, I connected with a mutual friend of ours who was running a triathlon class at the Goldman Sachs gym. And I said, "What's triathlon?" He explained to me what it was, and I couldn't swim. I mean, I could float, but I couldn't really swim. I hadn't biked in years, didn't even own a bike, and hadn't run more than a couple of miles in the last 4 or 5 years. So, thought it sounded kind of interesting, got involved in the local triathlon community. Was part of a group called the Asphalt Green Club in New York, and did some triathlon training with them, and basically said to myself, look, I'm in a place right now where I want to set a lofty goal. Why not go for the biggest triathlon at the time, an Ironman triathlon? So I found one in Louisville, Kentucky that was 12 months later, and I said, let me see if I can go from where I am today, which is nowhere, to completing a race. And I did just that, and it was a great experience. It taught me a lot about myself.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Yeah, I mean, there's sports have a way of doing that, but I'm guessing Ironman triathlons especially.
They do. They force you to look inside, and you learn a lot about yourself. And it's a great way to also get involved in the local community and be supported by many fellow triathletes who are still friends of mine today.
Yeah, that's awesome. Uh, so so also maybe we could talk to the listeners about sort of your entrepreneurial journey from your time at Goldman, working for as a investor, and then sort of what your trajectory has been like up until today.
Yeah, it started out at Goldman. I was empowered with the ability to travel all around the country to meet with the entrepreneurs that we ultimately invested in. And I spent a whole lot of time on the road, in front of these CEOs. I'm some 22-year-old kid fresh out of college, and my goal was to say, hey, look, beyond the firm's capital, what can we do to add value to your business? And so I listened, I learned, and I did as much as I could to leverage my own experiences, but also the resources of Goldman Sachs to support the companies that we had funded. And, I did that for long enough to realize that I actually didn't want to be the investor anymore. I wanted to be in their shoes. I wanted to be the entrepreneur. And so I actually just left. In 2010, I applied to business school. I was accepted to the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania here in Philadelphia. And I gave Goldman my notice, and I left. And I came to, Wharton to kind of rebrand myself as an entrepreneur. And I was very lucky to found my first company with a fellow classmate of mine. It was a language translation business that we took out to Colorado for the Techstars Boulder Business Incubator Program, which is sort of like an accelerator program. It's the business that you alluded to that was featured on Shark Tank, and it's a company I grew out of New York for a number of years before we were ultimately acquired. And then, from there, had some successes and some good learning experiences, as they say, along the way. But that was kind of my first foray into entrepreneurship.
Got it. Very cool. Again, we'll talk more about some of those items as we go through the podcast. So Goldman, in perhaps a lot of the finance industry, I feel like they're known for certain things like long hours, pretty high intensity, collaborative work environment. That being said, how would you say that your time at Goldman, like you said, as a young 22-year-old right out of college, how has that shaped your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, I'd say like, in general, Goldman is a great culture, but there's sharp elbows, there's high expectations as far as, what they put into you and what they expect out of you. So it taught me a whole lot about myself, how to endure long hours, how to, effectively, work with teams and individuals far smarter than myself. So it taught me a whole lot about myself, and the ability to, cope with the demands of a firm and the expectations there for sure. But it also taught me a lot, throughout my entrepreneurial journey, the importance of surrounding yourself with people to kind of elevate your own performance as an entrepreneur. I like to say I was the dumbest person in the room, and there were a whole lot of people around me that were far smarter, and so I absorbed and learned a lot from them along the way.
Got it. Got it. So sort of similar to that question, your journey as a triathlete, like you mentioned before, there's a lot of learning lessons in that as well. How has that also shaped your entrepreneurial journey? Because I know for myself personally, my background in sports, I sometimes rely on those experiences and sort of like if this were in a sports, element, what would I do? And it kind of helps me clarify things. But I wanted to hear from you how your triathlon training in that journey has helped you as an entrepreneur.
I would say there's very few things, if anything, I've ever done in my life, personally and professionally, that was as challenging as completing an Ironman triathlon and like, going from zero to finish line in 12 months, overcoming, a surgery, a month before the experience,
Oh, wow.
getting up at those long hours, 4 in the morning, training before work, working from 7 a.m. till midnight, coming home, trying to get some sleep, training again. It was an incredibly daunting experience. And so anytime like I have a challenge on a business endeavor, and there are always going to be highs, but there are also going to be plenty of lows along the way. I look to that as a source of strength and inspiration. And so if there's an investor meeting that didn't go well, or we lose a client, or a challenge with a supplier, or a team member issue, and it feels all consuming at the moment, kind of zoom out and say, you know what, in comparison, that's nothing compared to doing a triathlon, running a marathon. So I look to that experience as a real source of strength.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. It's when you go through all that, I don't know what the right word is, just that like 12 months of, there's a lot of pain and suffering and intensity that goes into that. It helps put things into perspective, I think.
It absolutely does, and it keeps you grounded too.
It does. So one thing, business and certainly sports have in common, regardless of the sport, is risk. And I think when a lot of people hear the word startup or small business or entrepreneur, sometimes the first thing that comes into people's mind is risk. Oh, that's crazy risky. I could never do that. Or, I'm not that, I'm a risk averse kind of person. Um, that being said, over the last few years, I personally have had a lot of friends who've had sort of those 9 to 5 jobs who have lost those jobs. And I feel like things have transitioned, I don't know, maybe the last few decades where, those 9 to 5s aren't so secure anymore. There aren't so many jobs out there with pensions and so forth. And I just want to kind of get your take on that. Do you feel that, with all the technology today and all the support structures that, starting a business, becoming an entrepreneur is still, I mean, it's always risky. But do you think there's the same amount of risk as almost even just working for another company that, anything can happen, right?
Yeah, it's a super interesting question, Rick. I would say the way I think about startups is there's definitely risk, but it should be a calculated risk. You don't
Yeah.
just kind of like jump off a building and hope to fly. You make sure the parachute is in place and you're ready to go. And so, from my vantage point and my experiences, if you can set yourself up for success by ensuring that you have enough cushion, let's take an example. Someone is currently working in that corporate job you mentioned, the 9 to 5 role. It doesn't mean they need to necessarily jump from, you know, giving in their notice day one, giving in their notice and then just going on the startup, from scratch. You can kind of dabble on the side. Whole lot of businesses that I work with and a whole lot of, friends of mine started out in the corporate career. And, on the side, they would moonlight on their business and they got it to a place where it felt viable enough that they could ultimately make that decision. And so I think there are risks, but there are calculated risks that you can make. And similarly, there's, you know, the risk profile that I like along the entrepreneurial journey is you kind of eat what you kill.
Yeah.
There's something really exciting and sexy about, look, if you're not successful, well, you're not going to be, if you're not, closing a client or building a new business, there are certainly going to be challenges. You won't have food on the table, but to the extent that you are successful, the upside is massive.
Yeah.
And to me, like that's a phenomenal risk profile for me personally. But at the same point, to your point, you can be in a very, steady corporate job and all of a sudden find yourself on the streets. And that could be
Yeah.
because of, changes going on at the company itself. It could be changes taking place in the economy. Um, so from my perspective, I think there are risks to both. But to me, you're able to reduce your risk today more so than ever in going the startup route because of the availability of technology and the
Yeah.
availability of resources. And so, if you can kind of do the best of both to kind of hedge yourself, that's a really high quality outcome.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, that's certainly the path that I took. I was working as you know, as a personal trainer in New York City, and all the time that I wasn't doing that, I was working on writing certifications and all that kind of stuff, and only took that leap once it seemed like a viable pathway. Um, so aside from that element, sort of the side gig where you're doing it, sort of moonlighting is to start up your business. What are some other things that you think entrepreneurs might be able to do, or aspiring entrepreneurs might be able to do to kind of reduce their risk a little bit, sort of at the outset?
Yeah, I think if you have a cushion for sure, if you understand like this is how long I can run in a startup or a new business endeavor before I really have to, meet real financial hardship. I think part of it too is getting support from loved ones. Like it's a daunting journey, and if you can have encouragement and support and the confidence of those around you, husbands, wives, parents, children, I think that really helps. Creating a plan, have a business plan, not because necessarily everything is going to go according to plan, but it forces you to actually project into the future what the business will look like. It forces you to face facts before you actually have to face them.
Yeah.
I think that's a very important thing for people to do. Um, and then ultimately, like, it's cliche, but like it has to be something you're passionate about. It has to be something
Yeah.
you're about. Because at the end of the day, it's not going to be easy, no matter how successful you are. Any successful entrepreneur out there will tell you there's been plenty of times in their lives where they've looked in the mirror and said to themselves, like, what am I doing with myself? What am I doing with my life? Was
Yeah.
a decision for me. And
Yeah.
if you don't have the passion behind it, it's very hard to, experience effectively go for the long run. It really is a marathon.
Yeah, yeah, that's it's so true though, right? Like every person that is, self-employed doing the entrepreneur thing, I have not talked to one that hasn't at some point been like close to tears, be like, yeah, what am I doing with my life? God, if I could just have that old 9 to 5 job back and a steady paycheck or whatever it is. And like you said, the passion or whatever it is, that end game of, why you originally did it, almost always wins out. But yeah, there are some dark moments sometimes.
Yeah, we love to focus on the big stories, but even the big stories, the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world have had those moments where,
Yeah.
they're like, what am I doing with my life? I should have stayed in school or I should have stayed in that corporate realm. We've all been,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. Um, so, our demographic, as you know, is endurance athletes, coaches. I would say most of them, at least from what we hear, either do it as a side gig sort of indefinitely. It's just something that it's their passion, or some of them do want to turn it into a full-time career. That being said, most of them aren't going after, investor capital, it's all, typically bootstrapped stuff. So I want to get your thoughts on what are some creative ways that you've heard of for, entrepreneurs, aspiring small business owners to sort of bootstrap their business.
Friends and family for sure. So to the extent you have close friends and family that can support your journey along the way, that's always fantastic. Crowdfunding can be really creative in the coaching realm. So if you would normally charge, I don't know, $150 a session, or $150 an hour, and you go out there and you say to a group of potential clients, look, I'm going to give you 10 sessions for 75 a session, but you purchase it up front to support me.
Yeah.
That's a way to get early funding for your business. It's also a way to get early support, early clients, and early potential referrals. I could see that as another very viable channel in the coaching business, as a way of garnering that early funding that you need to build that cushion for yourself without having to go out and raise capital from institutional investors, which probably don't make much sense for an individual coach building a small business.
Yeah. That's a great point, actually, because, we do hear from a lot of new coaches that they'll start off offering their sessions for free. They'll go out there because they don't feel like, they want to use it to kind of grow them as a coach and get some clients. But that's a great idea as far as sort of a reduced fee, but also at the same time kind of building up your cash reserves.
Yeah, and you can do it on like, crowdfunding platforms, but it doesn't need to be like that. I mean,
Yeah.
if you live in Denver and you've got, a close circle of potential clients, you kind of soft circle it with them and say, look, I'm going to go out on my own. I'm going to build my coaching business. Here's what I would normally charge. Would you come in at half that rate or a third of that rate or 10% of that rate for a
Yeah.
bulk number of sessions, like support me along the way. I think that's a great way for coaches to build up a base for themselves.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I completely agree. So both in your time when you were at Goldman, when you were advising these small business owners, and then of course your time as a small business owner, as an investor, what are some of the most valuable lessons that you've learned over the years that you feel would really resonate with coaches?
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, first and foremost, you have to believe in yourself. And it sounds really cliche. It sounds very obvious, but so many people take that leap, take that risk, take that calculated risk, I should say, and they don't necessarily believe in themselves 100%. I think you have to have that fundamental belief because at the end of the day, you're going to get punched in the face. And if you don't believe in what you're doing and your ability to overcome, you're not going to succeed in the long haul. So for sure, that's one thing. The second thing is like take care of yourself. I think about this a lot. Like if you're a coach, you would never counsel a client who is running a marathon to run that marathon at a sprinter's pace. You'll burn out, you'll die along the way. Similarly, like the journey that is building a company, doesn't matter if it's a venture-backed company or a small individual, mom and pop business, um, that is a marathon itself. And so you need to pace yourself. If you yourself, the engine behind the business, are not taking good care of yourself, there is no way you're going to be able to sustain for the long haul. And I think I see this, I cannot say this enough. I see this among so many peers. I see this among so many entrepreneurs that I work with. I see this amongst companies that I consult with. Take care of yourself, be good to yourself, set yourself up for success, and don't burn out.
Yeah, yeah, that's huge. It's so interesting you said that. When I first moved out here to Colorado, we had a newborn. The business was sort of at that tipping point, that inflection point where, okay, I think this can make it. And there was just such a innate drive. Oh, this thing has to succeed. Everything else went out the window. Exercise, eating well, all these things. And I mean, for lack of a better word, I definitely sort of hit a level of depression, where, I wasn't doing the things I enjoyed doing. And it really crushed me. And it took that, though, being pretty low, to be like, okay, I got to change this. But it took a while. It took a while.
Yeah, and your story is unfortunately not alone. I've been there. Everyone else has been there too, who's been in our shoes before. And it's so critical to take good care of yourself. And if you're not healthy, like what's it all for anyway?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, it's funny. I remember when I was working at Goldman as a trainer, I would hear the people that got it, they would put on their schedule, just like any other meeting or anything else, like go to the gym, do this, do that, and it was just as important as any other aspect of their day. And I clearly didn't take a lesson from that. I was aware of it, but I clearly didn't. So yeah, it's spot on.
It's funny you remind me. So back when I was at Goldman, health and wellness wasn't as at the forefront as it is today. You didn't have companies promoting health and wellness like they do today. And I remember it was always like, you shouldn't be caught as a financial analyst first year at school at gym during the daytime hours. You're either there before 5 a.m. or maybe you can get there at 8 o'clock at night. But God forbid you're seen there during a lunch hour or during the afternoon and you're
Right.
slacking. Kind of like, you might see the head of the division and you'd kind of like, hide your face and go around the corner. But I was actually very lucky to have a boss who encouraged that level of physical activity. And he would always take me to the gym with him. And I never felt uncomfortable because he was there. But you're exactly right. Like if you were a C-suite executive, for sure, you'd put that on the calendar, you do your training. But if you were a lowly, financial analyst, first year out of college type experience, it was always like, you needed to be healthy, you needed to get your physical activity in, but definitely don't do it during work hours.
Yeah. Well, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but I have one other funny story about that, we had physical therapy on site at the gym. And I would say if I walked into there, we had pretty good partnership with them, there would always be, I think they had like 6 or 7 PT tables in there where people could get treated, and at least 3 of them were people there sleeping.
Yeah,
And the whole thing was like, it's socially acceptable to go down there and get PT, even though once you get down there, you're like, I'm out. I'm gonna sleep for 30
exactly.
minutes or 40 minutes. So
Exactly.
that's interesting. Um, so as you alluded to, every single person in every single job, and especially the entrepreneur route, make mistakes. I make mistakes on what often seems like a minute to minute basis. Oftentimes you get a call or an email thereafter, like, Ryan, help me, I don't know what I'm doing. Um, I was wondering if you could share some of the mistakes that you've made or you've at least heard of, maybe from fellow entrepreneurs, with respect to things that maybe if you could sort of enlighten us, that some of the listeners might be able to either reduce or eliminate some of those mistakes.
Oh my God, where do we get started? I've
Yeah,
made
this could be like a 10-hour podcast.
Oh yeah, we're gonna be here all day. Let's freshen up our coffees here.
Yeah,
No, I've made plenty of mistakes along the way, and I've seen a whole lot. I would say like one of the biggest ones I've ever seen is related to team. There's always pros and cons. Like you as a company owner, company founder, do you want to go it alone, or do you want to bring in a partner or partners? And there's pros and cons to each, right? Like if you're going it alone, all the upside is yours, and you kind of, you don't necessarily need to report to anyone, and you can be available when you need to be available. But at the same point in time, there's no ideation. You're kind of like all the ideas are in your own head, right? You don't necessarily have someone to bounce the ideas off of. Bandwidth, there's going to be so much work that goes into building the company. If you're going to be doing it all yourself, it's going to take far longer to do that. And that's just the kind of the tip of the iceberg. And then similarly on the partner side, like, you bring in a partner, bring in several partners, pros and cons. Pros are, you get extra support, you get new ideation, you get help along the way. But cons are, what if it's not a good fit?
yeah,
So I've had experiences in the past where I built companies on my own, and I've had experiences where I built companies with team members, call them co-founders or partners or early colleagues that didn't work out.
yeah,
And so like, some of them have been phenomenal. Some of my closest friends in life are co-founders, and I've also had experiences where I've worked with people that turned out to not be the best quality individual to work with. They might be a friend, but when it comes down to business, um, you know, business and friendship doesn't always mix. And so I would
yeah,
say, one of the biggest mistakes is not treating up to the extent you are going to go with a partner. Think about it as a marriage. Like it truly is a marriage. You're going to be in the weeds together all hours of the day, all days of the week, throughout the year. If you don't feel like you're comfortable living with this person and being married to this person, then don't necessarily go into business with them. I would say that's one of the biggest mistakes. I'd say other mistakes are around investors and investor capital, and maybe it's less of a concern in the coaching realm, but like if you're going to take money from someone, you have a financial duty to do right by them. That person has worked extremely hard for their resources, and you don't want to squander it. You want to do right by them. And not every business is an investor backed business, and not every business is going to give that investor the type of return you're looking for. So think long and hard about how do you want to grow the business? How do you want to fund a business? And whether or not an investor is right for you. And to the extent you do decide to take investor capital, make sure it's the right investor capital. Make sure it's someone that you want to work with that's going to be supportive of your business and not be a value attracted investor. I would say those are some of the more common mistakes that I've seen and that I've personally experienced as well.
yeah. Got it. It's so interesting you said that about the partners, or anyone you bring onto your company. And it's you're so right. It's my business partner, Cindy. It was funny. I was at a place where I knew I needed someone because I was drowning. But maybe it's a control issue. I'm like, but I don't want to give up control. This is my baby. I don't want to do it. And what it took was COVID, because when COVID was happening, as every headline was another million people just died today, and my wife doesn't know anything about the business. I'm like, what happened if I die? That would be bad. And that was the catalyst, because I'd been working with her in a much smaller capacity, but as far as bringing her on full time, it took that, sort of like me dying or potential, thought process to bring on a partner. And I'm so glad I did. It was the best decision I ever made. But I think that hurdle is sometimes really difficult.
Totally. Yeah, it's something I've thought long and hard about is who's going to carry the business forward if something happens to you. And it's
Yeah.
similarly, like I've worked with my wife was involved in my one of my early companies. I didn't want to bring her on board, and this is certainly not her forte. And so when I started my current company, made sure to have a really rock solid co-founder.
Yeah, that's huge. That is huge. So to finish off, just because again, this is more for just personal interest, maybe for myself as well as our listeners. So, you know, most people have seen at least one episode of Shark Tank, I'm guessing, and it's a pretty awesome show. I love it. So maybe two things, if you could tell us what it was like being on Shark Tank, and also what are you currently working on? What's going on with Ryan Frankel today?
Shark Tank was a wonderful, challenging, unique experience. The backstory is I was in grad school at the time, building out my first company, heard about a casting call for Shark Tank, submitted an application on it's I you get a lot of emails, and so like the deadline was 5 o'clock on Friday. I opened my email, it's like 3 o'clock on Friday. I must have missed this. I threw together a last minute application and went out with a bunch of classmates for to celebrate the end of the school week. And you know, five 5 o'clock that comes around, and 6 o'clock I get a phone call myself. I don't recognize the number. It's an LA number. Turns out it's a producer from Shark Tank. Hey, really like your submission. Let's talk. And so, over the course of the next several weeks, had a number of conversations about the business, got him to meet my co-founder at the time. And they said, look, we'd love to fly you out to LA and, have you pitch. So fast forward 3 months, it's July. I've just graduated from Wharton. I'm sitting in LA, about to pitch the Sharks for our business, which was a language translation business. And we needed a translator. Our pitch was going to be to actually speak to the Sharks in another language, give
Mm.
our pitch in Spanish, and have a translator on the screen, an interpreter on the set to actually to do the translation. And so we didn't know who to bring out to the set. So I actually called my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, and said, "Do you want to be on TV?" She's like, "Hell no, but I'll do it." Uh, Flew her out to LA. She did the whole thing. She was on the set with us. We go behind the scenes afterwards, and we closed a deal with Mark Cuban and Kevin O'Leary and Robert Herjavec, and we decided to actually move forward with the deal from um, Kevin O'Leary, believe it or not. And I remember it
Okay.
was like the first company or one of the first companies ever to turn down Mark Cuban to
Okay.
go Mr. Wonderful. Uh, so after the show, we met with Mr. Wonderful's chief of staff, investment analyst, and ultimately we actually decided to walk away from the investment. There's certain terms and requirements that would preclude us from raising additional capital for a certain period of time,
Mm.
and we knew we needed more money than what we had just asked for on the show. And at the time we were a part of an incubator program called Techstars. We were raising additional funds. So ultimately, excuse me, we passed on the investment. And we were told by the show that they decided they weren't going to air our episode because we had passed, and we were very disappointed by that because there's obviously some great marketing
Oh,
exposure from
sure.
being featured on the platform. I think at the time they called it $1 million worth of ad promotion value for us.
Mm.
12 months later, I get a phone call. It's like, hey guys, we pre-screened your episode from last year with a bunch of cast members, and it was hugely popular. We're going to air you on the season finale in 3 weeks. Get
Oh,
ready,
wow.
get ready. So we stepped up. We brought in additional technologists to make sure that the website wouldn't crash. We had interpreters and translators from all over the world ready and available to actually support the product when consumers downloaded our app and started to use the app itself. We hosted a big party in New York the night of the airing. It was like an incredible experience. It allowed us to bring in our friends, our family, our team members, while also generating some really great buzz for the business. And so honestly, phenomenal experience for me. And I think very highly of the show. I think they've done really great things for entrepreneurship and fostering this idea that if you have an idea, if you have a business, you have a vision, you can really do anything. And so kudos to the show's producers and to the Sharks themselves for building what I think is a really phenomenal investment platform.
Yeah, that's awesome. And most importantly, your girlfriend, now wife at the time, didn't break up with you for for being like, hey, you got to help me out. You got to come out to LA right now.
She didn't, and funny story, she showed my kids, my daughter in particular, who's now old enough to know what she's watching on TV, the actual episode. And you wouldn't,
Oh,
why are you on TV? What are you doing there? What's daddy doing? And she was totally blown away. So it'll be a nice memory to have.
Oh, that's amazing. That is so awesome. So maybe if you could tell our listeners, what are you doing now? What's going on?
Building a company called Workup. Website is workuphq as in headquarters.com. It is a discovery platform for consumers of all walks of life to discover best-in-class brands as well as really high quality knowledge to help them achieve their health and wellness goals. And so you can think about it sort of as an Expedia.com, if you will, of consumer health and wellness products and services. And so much like, you and I might visit Expedia to get inspired about where to go this December during our vacation, or to book an actual trip and identify a hotel or an airline or a travel agent that we might want to work with. Consumers visit Workup to get inspired about their health, to learn about a specific illness or ailment or concern they might have, but also to see all of these really high quality brands that are there to support them. And it's really been built out of, I think you could probably relate to this. There's a whole lot of products and services out there, 99% of which are not really grounded in science. It's almost like the Wild West, especially when it
Yeah.
comes to the supplements. And, it's almost like the snake oil salesmen of the world. And so you as a consumer, you're sort of a deer in headlights. There's so many products out there, so many brands, that you don't necessarily know where to get started. So it was built out of my experiences and the experiences of my co-founder and experiences that I've heard from people from all walks of life. That's super challenging to filter the signal from the noise and get started. And so we're building Workup to help people do just that, to identify these great brands and to help them set themselves on a path towards success.
That's awesome. No, you're 100% right. There is so much noise out there, and for every product out there, there's probably at least 100 options, right? And it's like, and it's almost, unless you have some innate knowledge of this or you spent hours doing your own research, it's almost impossible to decipher what's the quality, what's the science-backed, evidence-backed product versus one that's complete, like as in your term, snake oil.
Yeah, it's and you've got a lot of like products that are, not well known that are certainly in that category of call it snake oil. But there's also, just because you have marketing dollars to pump into a sponsorship of a podcast doesn't necessarily mean your brand is best or is really grounded in science. And so on both ends of the spectrum, sort of the no-name brands, but also the ones that we hear about on our favorite longevity podcast aren't necessarily the best brands for that specific niche or for that specific product or service. And so for us, it's really about uncovering the high quality products and then making them very available and very exposed to our consumer audience. And then similarly, helping the brand stick out. If you're a quality brand and you want to demystify this quality assurance, well, your feature placement on our platform helps you illuminate the caliber of the brand that you have.
Yeah, that's great. Well, in my opinion, it's certainly a much needed service and product. So yeah, I wish you all the best with that.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for being on our podcast. We will be putting on the outro your website so people can go and check it out. If any of our listeners are interested in a USCA certification, you can use the word or the code ATE75 for $75 off. Again, well, thank you so much, Ryan. Like I said, to all the listeners, Ryan is certainly a mentor of mine. He's received more than maybe his fair share of calls and emails from me when I certainly need advice. So it's been a pleasure having you on.
Pleasure to be here, Rick. Thanks again.
All right, you got it. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks.